Democratic Socialists in the Streets Today. It's with Alexa Avilés, who is a city council candidate who just won the primary. And so pretty much she's a future city councilwoman. She's an education activist and affordable housing activist. The title of this panel is Democratic Socialists in the Streets Today. And we're just going to focus on activism and how it relates to civil disobedience and nonviolence. Marcela Mitaynes is a New York State Assembly member representing 8051, my home district here in South Brooklyn, parts of Red Hook, parts of a larger area. She recently did 15 days of a hunger strike in order to bring attention to the Excluded Workers Fund, which eventually won $2.1 billion from Cuomo's Albany government to give COVID relief and federal relief to undocumented workers. So she's a hero of the people. Has only been in office a year, less than a year. Marcela, it's so great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I keep reminding myself I've only been in office 10 months.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the hunger strike and about, I know you've also gotten arrested doing civil disobedience for affordable housing. So there's a lot we could talk about here as part of Democratic Socialists in the Streets Today. So let's focus on first on the hunger strike and the Excluded Workers Fund. What was that like to go without substantial food for 15 days?
Just understanding that folks are taking this drastic measure is very impactful. So I was actually up in Albany in conference trying to, organize around making sure we had sufficient votes to pass the Excluded Workers Fund when the folks in the campaign had actually started a hunger strike. It was about day 10 where it just felt like they weren't getting as much press, they weren't getting as much news, just having to deal with a lot of racist comments about what we were trying to do and who we were trying to help. It just felt like I needed to do something and I wasn't being as useful up in Albany. And there was certainly a lot of people that were supporting and pushing it that I decided to come back to New York City and join the hunger strikers. And it was a very humbling experience. I got to know the folks individually, their struggle during the pandemic, their loss of work, not having sufficient healthcare, putting them in a very vulnerable situation, having family back in their countries that they were also supporting that they couldn't anymore. And we started the day together in a circle. We ended the day in a circle where people even from Sunset Park were coming down to just support.
Since it's Gandhi's birthday, I got to point out that Mahatma Gandhi used to also use the hunger strike. But I just want to point out to the audience that the hunger strike is a great nonviolent tactic, and he used it to stop wars.
Yeah, so I had known that Gandhi had used this as a type of tactic, and I think that it is, it's a very powerful tool.
Who else was part of the hunger strike?
So when the hunger strike first started, there was a bunch of elected officials that did it for 24 hours.
And it was like water and fruit juice, or tell me the details.
Water and coconut water and tea to begin with. There was a doctor and some students that were coming in and checking us twice a day at the beginning. We had to do a whole health check before we can go. It was a very powerful thing that happened, and I feel very connected to this group of folks as well.
We have a question from an audience member. They want to know, were there any immigrants who did get deported as a part of this action or the civil disobedience at the bridges or anything like that?
No.
Wow, that's amazing. Alexa has been an activist candidate for city council and also was a part of her campaign. And I know you also were active spokeswoman, endorser, using the bully pulpit of the New York Assemblywoman's office and to endorse Alexa for city council. And she handily won in a pretty big landslide the Democratic primary recently. So it looks like it's pretty much a sure thing that she's going to win the general. And so Alexa, welcome to the panel, and let's maybe talk to you a little bit about all this, about direct action, civil disobedience, nonviolence. Where are you at with all that?
Yeah, thank you. First, thank you so much for the invitation, and it's always good to go back to that moment and that important victory with Marcela and all her comrades and folks in community who sacrificed so much. And so happy they were victorious, because, you know, it fuels the fight. And, you know, we have several more years of fighting to do. So it's so important. These wins are really critical. You know, I think, as Marcela, you know, mentioned, you know, the stakes are high for our communities, and we have to use every tactic and every tool at our disposal. And you know, for decades, people have been ignored. They have done all kinds of things. And so really, as, you know, an elected official, right, who has access and has a bully pulpit, really is our responsibility to lift up the voices of our community and lift up and do the things that we need to do to shine the light, to bring the pressure, to make sure that people's needs are centered and finally heard, because people have been screaming from the rooftops for a long time that they are marginalized and they are oppressed and they do not have what they need, but our system keeps doing what it does. So, you know, I think we're going to use every tactic we possibly can, whether it's, you know, getting arrested, but always protecting our community, right? It's important that Marcela mentioned behind the scenes, right? Not only is undocumented people putting their bodies on the line, but also people who interact, Black and brown folks who interact with the justice system here.
It seems like campaign focused in on education, and you have a background in philanthropy and education activism, and affordable housing to an extent, but really it was education. So tell us how that evolved.
Yeah, so it always feels like the campaign is a whirlwind, and when you're done, you're like, what? How did all that happen in such a short period of time? You know, I think our campaign was focused on education, and big part of that had to do with much of my work in the community, right, was centered around education as a parent, where my children were in public school, and that's how I started specifically in the community as a PTA leader. And, you know, it just always mushrooms, right, as you see the needs, you know, the needs of children are magnified in school when they are housing insecure, when they are food insecure, if there is violence, whatever need it is, it manifests in school. And so that, you know, that activism and engagement with the community just kind of mushroomed. And the truth of the matter is, like, over a period of 10 years, right, it worked already with hundreds of families across the district.
And Alexa, what are your plans for your first 100 days in office in city council?
Well, definitely, you know, we're really focused on setting up an office and making sure that we have a very strong staff. You know, 100 days gets us into choosing a speaker, and already very much into the budget. And so we are using all our time to focus in on what some of those budget battles, anticipating what some of the budget battles will be for our community, and assessing like where we are with some of those asks. And obviously, you know, our first act as a new council will be to choose the speaker, which is very important.
Are you going to introduce legislation that will help education in the community?
Oh, good question.
I'm gonna hold you to the feet to the fire.
Yeah, good question. Good question. You know, interestingly enough, much of our education policy is determined at the state level, and where the rubber hits the road for us is really around funding. But we are definitely considering what legislation is both on the books and hasn't passed that's really good that we're going to need to push hard, or legislation that we've passed that is unfunded and that is critical. And we have quite a lot of that across multiple issue areas, and all those things we're looking at.
The question is Rikers Prison. This could be for both of you. You could go around the room here. The question is, please, what hope is there to close this place?
You know, I've had personal experience in Rikers, having so much of, I grew up in East New York, Brooklyn, and this is a place that many of our young people and certainly many family members have been held. It is a disaster. It's always been a toxic place for any human. So we absolutely need to close it. You know, you see the crisis, which is why probably your question is an exclamation marks. We need to close it as soon as possible. We need to decarcerate. There is we need adding more security, more correctional officers, or more facilities, or opening old facilities that have been shuttered, because we know the criminal justice system.
But I think, you know, what Alexa said is right. It's about that this is just the beginning, and we need to continue to talk about this. We need to continue to put pressure. We need to find out what other things we can do, right? So we're starting to have conversations with the DA about pressuring them to ensure that the judges are offering bail to folks that, you know, are entitled to it, who deserve it, who can actually, you know, use this process to avoid having to be incarcerated in jail. Because what they're doing is they're just waiting for their time in front of the judge. So there are things that we can do. We need to make sure that we continue with the pressure. So it's really going to be the rest of us holding them accountable and continuing to apply pressure. One of the things that we started doing at the state level now too is we're sitting in on these hearings. So the judges are starting to know that there are elected officials coming into their courtrooms and sitting and listening to see how they conduct their business. And I think that if we can continue to find creative ways like this, to let them know that this is, you know, very important to us, and we want to see the changes and continue to apply the pressure.
Thank you so much, you two. I'm very proud of the work that you continue to do and will do in the future for peace, democracy, social justice, up against the corporate warlords and fat cats. So thank you guys. Thank you.